Well, hello, my name is Stephen Marks. This is the Land of Confusion show, the show where we interview interesting people. I'm like a minor amateur historian and writer. And this is my co-host, Paul.
Hello, I'm Paul O'Brien, realtor appraiser out of Houston, Texas. Curious individual who loves to get to know interesting people, like our two guests today, Dan and Omega Paladin, who will be referring to as OP. Dan, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Dan. I've worked in the as a technical editor and writer in nuclear safety with the government, with two different organizations: the Defense Nuclear Waste, no, the Defense, darn it, the Defense Nuclear Facilities Safety Board, and the Nuclear Waste Safety Scientific Safety Board. I'm not sure exactly what it is.
Yeah.
It was a while ago. So these a total of 4 years between the two of them from 2013 to 2017.
All right. And Omega Paladin, you mind introducing yourself?
Hey, my background, my profession is I'm a laboratory safety professional, and my background is growing up with my father, who was had over 20 years in the nuclear power industry. So I grew up learning about nuclear power, and it became my passion project to learn all about nuclear energy in all of its forms. And it's something I've always been fascinated by. I will say I'm not formally trained in nuclear energy, but it is something I've spent a lot of time researching.
Excellent. All right. Well, I have the first question for both of you. I guess we'll open up to Dan first. How would you give the scope of the current U.S. nuclear energy footprints in as a standalone power? Do you think the U.S. is ahead, right where it should be, or behind where it needs to be on nuclear?
If you had asked me that question about 10 or 15 years ago, I would have said we're behind. Right now, I think we're ahead. 10 or so years ago, we had, I think, 99 nuclear power plants. Since then, one of them is closed that I know of, the 3 Mile Island, oddly enough, nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania, closed up shop. I know that Germany has seriously reduced its nuclear power. It used to be, that's the one that I would have said was ahead of us, but now they're not. Several other European nations have strong nuclear programs. Sweden, I believe, does. Switzerland, perhaps. France, yeah, definitely France. So we're right in there. We're in the crowd.
Okay. Who would you say is ahead of us at the moment?
France, I would say, yeah. Sweden, perhaps, too.
Mm-hmm.
As far as like a percentage of nuclear power, electricity generated by a nuclear power.
Okay. When it comes to the U.S. Putting these plants together, or I actually have a technology question for either of you on this. Do you think in the last 30 years of nuclear power, we've done a successful job of dumbing this down? Because my perception of nuclear up to this point is it's always been an exceptionally specialized profession that only a rare few individuals can really do. Has the industry successfully dumbed itself down to allow itself to scale, in your opinion, in the last 30 years?
It's complicated. There's a lot of jobs at a nuclear power plant that do not require a engineering degree. Being a nuclear reactor operator requires you to be very intelligent, but does not necessarily require you to be to have a lot of college. Some colleges good, or you can go through the Navy nuclear program. My father went through the Navy nuclear program. It has a lot of very focused training and it gets a lot of experience, but for reactor operators, it's a very much a blue collar job, and that's a lot of what a lot of nuclear professions are. They are very, very talented and very skilled trades, basically.
I see. So when it comes to the individual, there's plenty of jobs that can be had at a power plant. Where do we? Because I'll preface it with this: some of the salaries I see for these power jobs come quite nice, like deep into six figures.
Yes.
Where would you say the bottleneck of the skilled labor is in a nuclear power plant? Like where's the greatest need? What can't they churn out enough talent for?
I'm not sure that it's a question of talent. It's more, I think, a question of being able to pass the security requirements to get the job. So, like you can't be on drugs, you can't have a history of alcoholism, that sort of stuff. The stuff that would eliminate you from a regular, Department of Defense security clearance is the same stuff that will eliminate you from a job at a nuclear power plant. So that's a hurdle because, I mentioned before that a good friend of mine works at a nuclear power plant, and he says that they're always trying to find people to fill jobs, but the stumbling block is passing that security clearance background check.
So outside of drugs and alcohol, is there anything else that really
financial, just the same things for a Department of Defense clearance, financial irresponsibility.
Can you give the audience like a threshold of what that financial like what's the threshold of
Like
okay, you're too loose with your money to be working at this power plant?
Right. So yeah, the stuff that got the spies in trouble, like Edward Ames and those people, taking money to reveal secrets. So if you suddenly have bought a new car and a nice house and you're not making enough to justify that, then people are going to question whether where's this money coming from, that sort of stuff. If you've had you've gone into debt, like bankruptcy, bill collectors, that sort of stuff. If they see a lot of that in your past, that's a red flag that you're maybe untrustworthy around people who would give you money to learn secrets.
I see. So
chronic gamblers need apply.
Yes, exactly. Gambling problems. That's a big one.
Opie, you said earlier that nuclear operators require you to be are typically very intelligent people. What sort of judgment are they looking for, or what sort of judgment is required to be a nuclear operator?
Judgment? Well, they typically want someone who can think on their feet and follow understand, check, go through a lot of checklists and such. Remember, like the civilian nuclear power program is heavily based on the Navy nuclear power program. So there's a lot of qualifications, lots of tests, and advancement and continuing education and such. When I applied to be an operator several years ago, they have an initial screening test, which is a fairly challenging test, and then they go through a number of processes. I didn't make it to the background check, but I've taken background checks for other positions, and one other thing you can run into on a background check is locations. Where have you lived? Because every spot you lived in like the past 10 years has every address, and I'm not talking about permanent address. I'm talking about even temporary addresses. I lived in several different dormitories in college, and I had tons and tons of different addresses, and you needed a reference for each of those locations. it was basically impossible. I probably would not have been able to pass that just because I didn't have enough references for each of the dozen locations I lived at.
Mm-hmm.
So now, but yes, you basically have to pass all these tests. You have to be able to manage a lot of different information coming at you. It's similar to being a board operator at a chemical process plant, and you have all this information on a control system, and you have to be able to understand it, comprehend it, and find what you need to do next.
Okay.
That's why they trained them on a simulator. It's a bit like it's a bit like being a pilot.
Okay.
You have to look at a lot of instruments and then be able to synthesize that data. I mean, they have large simulators at your average nuclear plant, and where they have the duplicate the exact things inside of a control room and can say cause an accident in this simulator, just like you could have in a flight simulator.
Right. That's really interesting.
Like that scene in The Simpsons where Homer is in the simulator and they're like, it starts melting down, and the guy's like, "This is just a simulator. I don't understand where this radiation's coming from."
That's funny. So, between you, Dan, and then Omega with your father, could you describe what the type of person is that gets into this profession? What's sort of if you had to drop the type, like who gets involved in this profession? Like I'm sure there's a stereotype amongst operators. Can you kind of speak to that between your working experience and then Omega with your father? Dan, if you want to start.
I'm really not familiar with the operator end of it, but more with the other trades and so forth at a nuclear power plant.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same sort of thing as anywhere. You've got electricians, you've got carpenters, you got welders, you've got plumbers, all the normal trades that you would have at any sort of industrial facility. But they've got to jump through the security hoops, and they've got to, like particularly with the welders have to be top notch. Mm-hmm. Because for every weld is inspected, and it's got to be 100% on the money. So that's the kind of welder who would get six figures anywhere, because they're just that good.
Right.
So yeah, welders are a huge thing in nuke power plants, because things have got to be just exactly so, and no possibility that radiation leaks out of your weld.
Mm-hmm. So very meticulous people.
Yes, very meticulous people. Exactly. That's good adjective.
What about your father?
You need to be able to deal with a lot of long hours. When it comes into an outage, everyone is working ridiculous hours, 7 days a week, at least 12 hours a day. Because when you're in an outage, everything is planned out, because of how the value structure of nuclear plants are. The fuel is like a tiny portion of the cost of operating a nuclear power plant. The major portion of the nuclear power plant's cost is its capital expenditure and the workers there. So whenever that plant is not producing power, you are losing vast quantities of money. So during an outage, everything has to be done really fast and really well. And later on, my dad's career, after he retired, I brought him back as a consultant to work on some outages where he would be sitting there, and he would be on staff to be an investigator, so that they could get an investigation done that same day if anything came up. They just had an investigator on on call, basically waiting for something to happen, even if it was just a forklift running over some guy's foot. So you need to have a high tempo and be willing to handle this. And a lot of different types of people will go into nuclear energy. But you do need to have some. For being an operator, you do have to be a bit more into taking tests, and a bit more of a geek or nerd tendency, just because there's so much reading and such involved. I've run into operators and rad protection people of all different types, but you do have to be able to handle all those tests and exams and such. People often get their start in nuclear working from outage to outage as a kind of a migrant worker, where they will start off with a basic position as a assistant radiation protection worker, who will just be going around taking readings, processing information and such. And then they would move on from that, even with very minimal college, and potentially move on.
So when it comes to, just sort of to help everybody understand the scale, when you are talking a general civilian, or of the 99, whatever you would consider the median plant that would be in that civilian plant, what power equivalent does one median civilian equivalent equate to in terms of coal mines, windmills, solar, etc.? If you guys know that off the top of your head.
I have no idea.
I could pull that data for you. I could maybe post it on Ricochet or in the comments and such. But it's the power level is very considerable. Comparing it to, say, coal or a hydroelectric dam it's fairly even, because in these cases, because you're building one big plant, and there's a lot of similarities to a coal plant, because in most of these cases you're taking something to heat up water into steam, and then run it through a turbine and generate power. And if you one of these things, you're using a nuclear reactor, the other one you're using a coal burning boiler.
Right.
Now, for windmills and such, the amount of energy generated by a nuclear plant, you're talking a huge field of windmills. And there's other issues that can come up there for comparing it to renewable energy. Renewable energy is just, even if you have all that, I can go on a whole detail about the issues with renewable energy, but just for this case, you need a lot of windmills or solar panels to equal one nuclear plant.
Mm-hmm. And their placement is also exceptionally subjective, which a lot of people don't really take into consideration. But when it comes to the topic of subjective location, maybe I want to move towards something that maybe Dan's a bit more familiar with, which is like disposal, safety, and whatnot. Why are certain waste disposal sites picked over another? I recall you talking about the Yaga Mountain. Like, what makes a ideal nuclear waste disposal facility?
Lack of geological movement. So it's, the plate tectonics, you've heard of that. So someplace that's in the middle of a plate, so that it's not going to get earthquaked or shifted around like that. Well away from population centers, well away from water sources. So, like heads of rivers, that sort of stuff. Well away from any other mining operations, like copper mining or coal mining, iron mining, whatever. And that's why Yucca Mountain was chosen, because it's in the middle of the western tectonic plate. It's on a mountain. It's not going to be shifted around very well. There's no water around there to speak of, that's going to, get contaminated with nuclear waste. No other mining operations to do for seismic reasons, and also for, like, oops, we ran through the wall here into your nuclear storage facility when we were mining for copper, that sort of stuff. So it's remote is a good catch-all phrase. It's way out in the sticks somewhere where nobody's going to come stomping around and disturb the place. And probably the most important is the stability and geological stability that I mentioned first.
So when they're picking a site, how far into the future are they projecting for disposal? Like I'm curious, because is it like a 30, 50, 100? Like, are we going to, like, how long do they plan to be dumping into a site?
Forever.
Yeah.
Basically, yeah, forever.
Infinite hole? Just
yeah.
I can speak to a little bit of this. You're in Ontario, we have a lot of nuclear power. It's about 30%, 40% of the grid here. Most of the locations are matching that idea that they put them out in the boonies, except for Pickering, which was when they built it out in the boonies, but now it's like half of Toronto surrounding the place.
Yeah.
But on site, they built like a giant warehouse for all the nuclear waste. And it is like multiple football fields long. My understanding, in 70 years of operating the place, they've only filled a tenth of it.
That's dry cask storage.
Yeah.
Basically, you take the nuclear fuel and you put it inside of a specially designed concrete cask.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
There is a really funny and awesome video by the YouTuber Kyle Hill. He's like a science YouTuber. He did one on where he literally went to Dresden nuclear power station, which I'm quite familiar with, and he actually saw their nuclear waste site, and he actually stood right next to the dry casks. I think he even kissed the dry cask. I wouldn't normally do that just because it's a piece of concrete, but I mean, there's no radiation risk outside of these things, and short of having the U.S. Air Force bomb the place into oblivion with like a bunch of B-52s, nothing's going to really get through these casks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe I read once about like a nuclear. They took the shell, loaded up a fully loaded F4, and crashed into it, and it didn't even leave a scratch.
Wow. My favorite is they crash it is where they had the fuel cask where they transport the spent fuel in, and they put it on a train and crashed another train into it at normal speed, just going had a locomotive just plow into it.
That's it's impressive design how tight they freaking make those things. To bring it back to safety, I'm curious, what is the most regulated part of the process when it comes to nuclear safety? What's the part that kind of keeps everybody up at night, that it gets beat in the head of everybody?
I'd say it's the temporary storage facilities. Like one example is the Hanford site in Washington State. It's old. It's been around since the 40s. It's the stuff that I dealt with specifically in the Defense Nuclear Facilities Safety Board is weapons grade material. It's stuff that the waste from building bombs and nuclear weapons, and also the waste from nuclear weapons that were taken out of service, like the Minuteman missiles, that sort of stuff. So they got to do something with it. So they stick it in a storage facility. But again, since there is no permanent site, then it's just in temporary storage for a very long time. And that's where a lot of your problems pop up because, as I said, these facilities are old. They're starting to fall apart. They're starting to, the paint is chipping, the concrete is cracking, all that bad stuff is happening, and there's no place else to put this stuff.
Mm.
And one thing I would add, this is just my knowledge from open sources, is that a lot of this material is not just radioactively hazardous. It is actually very chemically hazardous as well. It is often these wastes are extremely corrosive, containing like hydrofluoric or nitric acid.
Yeah, a lot of it is in liquid form, and that creates a whole new set of problems.
Right, and that's the post-militarized use.
Yeah, from either dismantled nuclear weapons or from the manufacturing process to make them in the first place, and that's where the acids that OP mentioned comes from. Is that you need acids to, I don't know, etch things or whatever. I'm not sure exactly.
Dissolve a lot of the metals.
Yeah, right. Thank you. And that gets irradiated, and so you can't just pour that down the drain. So you got to store it.
I'm almost shocked that in almost 80 years they haven't developed some sort of, the wrong word is base, but some sort of solution to neutralize or advance the half-life of it, or something to.
Yeah, you can't advance the half-life.
You're not going to do that.
Unless you, I mean, perhaps you can call the Almighty and ask him to adjust the physical properties of these things, but I don't think you're going to be able to advance the half-life. But there are ways you can make it no longer a liquid, but they're often they're pretty challenging. We have ideas on that. Like one of my favorites is vitrification.
Yeah.
Where you literally turn it into glass.
Yeah.
It's not going to be leaching into the water anytime soon.
Right. That's interesting. It looks like we had some comments.
Yeah, so we have 3 member questions off of the Ricochet site. One's from Arahant, who asked, he's always been hearing about thorium reactors and some of these other light reactors. What do you think about, has anyone actually pulled any of this off, or what do you think of the prospects of getting some thorium or other not as hazardous waste nuclear plants off the ground?
There's a lot of different reactor types. The thorium, there's a whole bunch of these futuristic reactors. I mean, even between our two countries, David, I love your CANDU reactor. It's a good reactor. I think they're great, and I hope, and they're working on follow-ons for that. And it has its advantages. It has also some disadvantages, but it has a lot of benefit to it. Now, as far as thorium reactors, those are actually getting heavily pushed in India, because India has so much thorium. There are areas where they can't drill wells, because when they drilled wells, they actually started making people more sick than when they were drinking out of the surface water, because there's very heavy concentrations of thorium and other heavy metals in the ground. So they have a lot of thorium, but they'd love to use it. You can do a lot with a thorium reactor. The thing about them is that they use a molten salt mixture, which lets them do a lot of useful things because they can continuously cycle it out of the reactor. And the reactor, if you release the molten salt, you can just literally pump it out and it will stop reacting, and then you can cool it off that way. There's also a variety of different gas-cooled reactors. The U.S. has done a lot of work there. I believe there's a gas reactor in China, which the nice thing about these reactors is because they're gas-cooled, in principle, you can literally walk away from them. The Chinese reactor, I believe they turn, for guests, they'll just turn off the coolant and just, shut off the coolant flow to it and just let the thing sit. it's basically, those are basically walk away safe. They have some issues with getting the power out of the gas. There's some different approaches to that. Like you have with a gas turbine, you basically have like a nuclear fired gas turbine where it's a closed cycle gas turbine where you basically heat up gas, run it through a gas turbine, and then run it back through the reactor. Those are some people are still working on that. A lot of people who think who have ideas about hydrogen like those reactors because they get really hot and they can be used to make hydrogen. And yeah, they've also done a lot of development with light water reactors as well. Light water reactors are the reactors we see in the U.S. And Japan, also in a lot of Russia and Eastern European state, like the Russian VVER reactor is it's the one that the ones that Rosatom is currently trying to push are light water reactors. So there's the one last reactor type is the breeder reactor. Now they use the breeder reactors. There's a number of different variants, but the nice thing about a breeder reactor is a breeder reactor turns stuff that can't be used as fuel in a nuclear reactor into burnable nuclear fuel. You're not making fuel out of nothing. You're making fuel out of stuff that normally wouldn't be fuel. It'd be like having a car that you pour in, you stuff some coal in the back of your car, and as you drive along, it makes some of the coal into gasoline. I can go into the more details of it, but I figure it has a lot of useful.
Yeah, to me, I think a better metaphor would be it's like you use cooking oil to cook something, and then you have the residue cooking oil, and then you have a process to take that residue cooking oil and then cooking something else with it.
Yeah, but there's a lot of different nuclear reactor designs, and I find out about new ones all the time.
Do they all output relatively the same, or is one far superior than the rest?
Some of them have a lower output, but they're much smaller. There's the new movement for small modular reactors.
Yeah, Canada's been pushing that. A lot of the provinces are putting money into that.
They're really nice. The real gold standard for nuclear power, we talk about dumbing things down, is if they could make a reactor that is a sealed unit where you put water in and steam comes out and you don't have to mess with the actual reactor directly, and then you just return the entire reactor for recycling.
That sounds like a recipe for rednecks. Why not one of these in my RV?
Speaking of that, Ontario just signed a contract with Alberta to test fire that type of nuclear reactor in Alberta.
Nice.
Yeah, it was like a month ago.
Omega, are you familiar with I don't know what it's called, and I don't know what the fuel is, but it's about the size of a beer keg. I saw this at Oak Ridge when we visited there one time, and it's used to produce nuclear medical stuff, like for nuclear medicine, for chemotherapy. And it's, like I say, it's about the size of a beer keg. The nuclear material, which I unfortunately don't know what it is because I'm not a technician, is made flattened down into thin sheets and then put inside this casing in sort of a spiralish fin arrangement, and then they just sort of let it go, and then the particles spit out, and go down paths, and they're trapped and collected, and that's where your medical nuclear material comes from. Have you heard of this?
I've heard of it. I'm thinking I'm thinking of it might be called like Prism or Triga, but I need to look up the thing there. I've seen some videos of a similar type of reactor. It has a very unique design because it's designed to do something you never want to do in a nuclear reactor. it will go prompt critical, which basically means it goes into a state of where it basically goes very, very fast for a bit, and and if you see it, they're often immersed in water.
Yeah,
You have this bright spark of that, Cherenkov glow.
that might be what I'm talking about, because it has a short useful life, on months perhaps, and it is in water.
You run this thing, and it basically it looks it has a really impressive appearance to it, and sound. People are like, wow, this sounds just what I would expect, like it almost has like a movie nuclear reactor type vibe to it, which because an actual nuclear reactor is kind of boring. To look at. It just
doesn't do much.
But this thing, yeah, it's you could say it's the cinematic nuclear reactor.
Okay.
I'll see if I can post find a video of it.
I've got pictures of it from when I visited Oak Ridge that I can put somewhere. I'm not sure where I can display these things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Brian in the comments also mentions that he's living in Georgia, where the first new plant came on last year, and I believe it's like the first new nuclear power plant that's been built in the United States. Is what?
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, so I think we're back to 99 plants.
Okay, let's shoot for 100. When it comes, so this is actually the first time I've really heard any detail about the different types of plants like thorium or light water or anything like. Are any of these more cost effective than? Or let me actually get a definition for that. What is considered just the base nuclear reactor? What's the main input for that?
You have the two most common types of reactor in the United States are. We'll define what's called a light water reactor. Okay. That means it uses normal water, very clean and very purified water, but it's basically tap water.
Oh,
now, it's basically similar to tap water, maybe like distilled water or something like that. It's normal water. And then you have two different approaches to it. You have the boiling water reactor, which is what my father worked at. He worked at a boiling water reactor. That's one where the water directly goes through the fuel, it boils, and then the steam comes off of that and goes into the turbine, spins the turbine, generates the power, and then goes through a condenser, goes back in. And then you have a PWR, or pressurized water reactor. That's similar to the reactors that we have on submarines and aircraft carriers. In that reactor, you have fuel. The fuel is inside of a pressurized water loop, where the water is kept at a higher pressure so that it doesn't boil. And then it goes through a heat exchanger, and that heat exchanger is where the water will actually boil. So it has a secondary loop, and that secondary loop goes through the steam turbine. The nice thing about that is the steam you're generating is actually non-radioactive for a PWR. So that means you don't have to worry about radiation from your turbine. Now, there's a lot of places have built BWRs and PWRs around the world, and as I mentioned, and these use a uranium that's a little bit enriched. It has a little bit. It's processed to get one of the forms of uranium, the isotopes of uranium. Uranium-235 will be in a little bit more. Now, you can take a different approach, which they do in Canada. This is the standard Canadian reactor. Is the CANDU, which is Canadian. I believe it's Canadian deuterium and uranium reactor. And in that one, you have heavy water because it has an isotope, hydrogen-2 deuterium, and so you have to have a plant that will make all this heavy water for you. which adds to the expense. But the nice thing is, since you've enriched the water, you don't have to enrich the fuel. You can use uranium and run it straight through there. And it has a number of other different features, but that's the most common reactor in Canada. There's a few other ones that are built around the world.
Yeah, we exported some to India with the express idea that, oh no, there's no way anyone could reverse engineer a nuclear bomb using one of our plants. We were wrong.
So, okay, with sort of the standard being defined, these other types of materials being used in the plants that we were talking about earlier, are those more cost effective, or are they like, what's the word, geographically cost effective, like with the case of India and thorium, where it's more cost effective for them because it's everywhere? Or is
the real problem that you have here is a lot of these technologies are not very mature yet. They're still being developed. So they have a lot of it. They have advantages, but we don't know if they will actually turn out through the engineering process to be cost effective. We have some that are in prototype stage right now. And you have to basically think about all the different components here. And you basically have to build a prototype, work it out, and see how it goes. Like, the biggest problem we had in the United States is the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, is very, very, very slow to implement any changes. It's very hard to get something that is not a standard PWR, BWR built in the United States. I think it would be very hard for us to actually get a CANDU reactor improved in the United States, even with the very long proven history of safety of CANDUs. Right north, we could just literally go up there and point there, and but no, it's very hard to get them to change. So we don't have a lot of.
The administration basically shamed them into approving the Georgia plants. They're like, guys, you haven't approved a new nuclear power plant in 40 years. You got to do something.
Well, that's the thing. They just don't want to, because we're paralyzed by this, because what happened after and what we saw happening after around the time of 3 Mile Island is we ended up with the NRC, and the NRC is very, very just very, very conservative, and you need to have a strong pushback on this. The idea was that they would have the Department of Energy push back on it. The Department of Energy would push forward with nuclear power and support nuclear power, and then you'd have the NRC act as the regulator. But what ended up being is the NRC basically just kept on being a wet blanket on everything, and one of the problems that Obama probably kind of hurt himself, because one of the guys he appointed onto the NRC was a guy who was very strongly anti-nuclear, and during Fukushima, he basically was completely going off of his rocker and saying things that were insane. Yeah. That that was going to it was something ridiculous, like on the order of saying that it was going to make one of Japan's islands uninhabitable. The guy was crazy, and he was basically spouting off, because I'm an NRC member. But so the real issues are more political and engineering. We just have to figure out which one of these is going to be the most cost effective, because they all have their own advantages and disadvantages. And I don't think we should mandate one or the other. We should let the free market decide on which will go forward. I just hope we just need to get the government to stop subsidizing all these renewables, which aren't actually producing anything.
Right.
Well, they do seem to generate a tremendous amount of toxic waste when their shelf life goes away.
Yeah. Well, the thing that I learned about the renewables that really ticks me off, or not tick me, or I found interesting, what ticked me off I'll say later, but is like, especially with wind, you have to actually have them in certain parts of the country where the wind is just right. Because if it's too slow, the turbine won't spin. But if it's too fast, the friction generated on the turbine will actually cause the turbine to explode. And that's why they have to be very, very oiled consistently. And if they're not, even if they are, if the winds are going too fast, the friction caused by that turbine will cause it to burst into flames. And
Now,
I found that
yeah,
about wow. So it's not an everywhere thing the way they market it out to be. There's only a handful of very specific places that you can actually put these things down.
there's nothing that makes them inherently bad. The issue is they're not scalable.
Yes.
Right.
And Headed West had a comment on the Ricochet thread. He was talking about grid management and this. And there are, when you're trying to run a nuclear, you're trying to run power on a grid, you have your two different types of plants. You have base load power, which are things you leave on all the time, and then peaking plants, which is where when everyone comes home and turns on their air conditioner and you need all the power.
Mm-hmm.
Nuclear generally tends to be a base load plant because once it does, the cost of fuel for a nuclear power plant you could have uranium costs skyrocket, and the nuclear plant would still cost the same amount to run. Basically, it's such a tiny fraction because it uses so little fuel to generate its power. You can see like the same amount of fuel for a nuclear plant you can fit on basically a truck, as opposed to like an entire train full of coal. But so that's your baseload power. Also hydroelectric, coal plants, big coal plants and such. These are where you can get your base power. Then you'll have some ones that you can get the peak power. Like gas turbines are the best for peak power because you could just basically flick those things on, really quick, turn them on, and then turn them off when you're done.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have stuff like solar and wind. And then you run it, and they talk about, we have this wonderful amount we built all this megawattage of solar and wind. And if you drive by it, you'll notice that not all these turbines are spinning. And that brings up the dirty little secret of renewable energy: capacity factor. If you look at any of these plants, if you want power that is reliable, you need to build something that will backstop it. You basically have to build enough gas plants to deal with when the wind is too strong or too weak, or there's a storm that's damaged them. You just have to backstop them with something that's actually reliable.
Well, it's not only backstopping, it's that you've got to have the power all the time, because you never know when the wind's going to stop blowing. I mean, you can predict when the sun is going to go down, but you've got to have that base level of power all the time. And so a traditional, coal or natural gas power plant has to be running all the time. And then the so-called renewables are just on top of that.
Mm-hmm.
I think a good way to describe, these alternative energy, it's similar to alternative medicine.
Yeah.
If my back is sore, I'll go to a chiropractor, but I'm not, if I have an infection, I'm going to go to an actual doctor. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, and it's something that, and this is the part that gripes me at the renewables, is it's, especially in my profession as an appraiser with residential, the way they push solar. And I don't know how in Texas the solar companies haven't been sued for deceptive practices. They're saying that it'll improve the value of your home when they really don't talk about how much they cost, and they act like there's no maintenance involved whatsoever. And it's one of the things that irks me, just from an economic standpoint. Many things, as they get bigger, tend to get, as they get bigger, they tend to become cheaper. Just in general, just economics of diminishing returns. The bigger you scale, the cheaper it should get, in theory. Solar does the opposite. For some reason, the most efficient way to do solar is to give one to every house as opposed to having a field of them. Because this happens with every other utility. We don't have a well in each individual subdivision house. We have one, PUD, a public utility district that'll, give water to everybody. We don't have a septic tank for everyone. We have the city that'll do the sewer. And this tends to be a bit more, cash friendly than doing your individual ones. For some reason, solar panels, they've found that the only and best way to do it is to have them on your roof. And they haven't seemed to have engineered a way to have a public utility solar grid yet in mass. And that's something that always irks me. And it goes to what you said, Omega. The scale, it's not so much scalability, but the ability to bring it together and get more out of it by squishing, or by, what's the word I'm looking for here, if anybody could help me out.
Integrating it?
Yeah, it like integrating up with it. It doesn't. And that's something, because there's a certain curve that these things follow, but renewables don't follow this curve. In fact, the only way you can get more is by building more. Whereas with, I believe with like even nuclear, the bigger the plant, the more it can produce. And I believe that if you go bigger, you're able to scale with more energy. So it follows the laws of economics is what I'm trying to say, whereas renewables tend to not. So it's just a small rant on the renewable side. Just it's something I'm very passionate about, and I have to explain to a lot of upset people who just spent $70,000 on a solar panel system why that didn't impact the value of their house. And I'm like, well, how much a month are you paying on that solar panel system? 300, 400. Okay, how much was your electric bill? 300, 400. Right. You didn't gain value. You just trade one bill for another.
Yeah.
So,
well, I would say from a safety professional perspective, it's a lot safer to have one plant and have trained people working there than to have all kinds of people all around there having getting injured. And after car accidents, what the biggest cause of fatal injuries is? Falls. You have people coming up on roofs all around there, and these are random folks. Nothing against them, just that lots of people going up on roofs, and that's a lot of people ending up falling. And you just multiply that by all the different houses that would have all these to generate the equivalent power for, say, a nuclear plant. You actually start getting some significant numbers of people dying from falls, just because you have to have so many of them. And same with like these large scale installations. You have all these windmills that they have to service. You would start adding in risks of extra car accidents and such. Needless, in addition to all the fossil fuels burned to actually get these giant windmill blades and such to the places they need to be installed.
Exactly. 100% agree. So I have a fun question for both of you. If you could snap your fingers and put a new civilian plant anywhere in the United States, where would you put it?
Oh, that's a tough one.
Yeah. Where will the 100th plant go if you could snap your fingers and bring it into existence?
I would put it somewhere on the East Coast where it can, like on the Boston, Washington, D.C. corridor, because that's a big user of electricity. So someplace, Eastern Pennsylvania, put it in the middle of Philadelphia.
Ooh, interesting choice. Omega, what do you think? Snap your fingers. Where's it going?
I would find the least seismically active place near a water source in California, and maybe put it on the coast where it can we can hook up a desalination plant to it and run it off. Because the thing is, when you have all that hot steam, instead of just dumping the waste heat out, you can actually reuse that waste heat to, fuel a desalination plant, and basically just dare California to say no to cheap green power and clean water.
I think you just want to stick your thumb in the eye of California.
Well, I just want to see them say, no, we are not going to take this, clean energy and fresh water in a place that has having, droughts and electricity shortages. I just want to see them try and say that. Maybe get we'll have like a riot of people just saying like, let this thing open so you made me buy a Tesla. Now I can't actually charge the dang thing.
Right. We had another member question from Ricochet, Henry Costain, and I think it's kind of on point for this, getting near the end of the panel. Is there any way to move beyond the superstitious fear of anything nuclear?
Oh God, that is so ingrained in the American people. So in both of these agencies that I worked at, they would periodically have public meetings, and as part of that, they had public comment time, and there would just be a parade of NIMBYs, not in my backyard, people coming in and saying, I don't want to have nuclear waste, being trucked or, on a train through my neighborhood. Think of the children. Yeah.
The people what I would like to have at those groups is get people from the towns where there are nuclear plants. You have these people in the small towns, and they want the nuclear plants to stay. They don't want them to leave, because
that's a brilliant idea. Jobs, and
it gets you have you have power, you have good jobs, really good jobs, and tons of tax revenue, and it doesn't pollute. It doesn't smell bad. It does. I mean, the only thing you have is a bit of a cloud that comes out there, and that's just a cloud.
That's steam.
It adds to the scenery. Don't let it bother you.
Yeah, I can say here in Ontario, I just double checked. We have about 60% of our power come from nuclear, and all the nuclear power plants just happen to be located in swing ridings. So, which leads to a bipartisan consensus on why nuclear power is good, when both parties see political advantage from not messing around.
Yeah.
For Illinois, I grew up in Illinois, okay, and it has the highest density of nuclear power for any state in the United States.
Interesting. I never knew that.
I didn't know that either.
It has a lot of nuclear plants. There's they actually had one that was very near Chicago, Zion, which eventually they shut down just because there was the plant got old and they found a defect in there that wasn't worth the cost of repairing. They found it and it's like, okay, well, we could fix this, but it would be too expensive, so they shut the place down. But anyway, only fairly recently was there more pushback on nuclear energy in Illinois, because even though it's an extremely democratically held state, the IBEW loves nuclear plants. International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, like they have tons of people working there who are bringing in tons of union dues. So all these union Democrats and such are saying, please build, keep our nuclear plants, build more, because they love the nuclear plants because it brings in lots of union jobs for them. It's only been when things have moved away from the old union base to more of the environmentalist base that it started pushing back, and then suddenly, the environmentalist base suddenly started some of them started, realizing that they're not going to actually be able to power everything with solar and wind, and if they want something that has no carbon, they're going to have to go with nuclear. I mean, that's actually been one of the big selling points. I'm like, I'm kind of, the one nice thing about the climate push is that it's really supported nuclear energy.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And rightly so. I mean, that the whole thing about the climate. I mean, the climate push does have its advantages. I think that is one of them when they start get moving. When it comes to the approval of new plants or maybe new methodologies, what kind of board is staffing this organization? Is it just old ways of thinking, or are lobbyist groups very proactive in the swaying of the approval process? What's holding, I guess, us from going to 200 plants?
Environmentalists.
Yeah,
How much sway do they really have, though?
a lot.
You'd be surprised.
Yeah, one of the
Help
problems.
me understand. Help me understand. Like, what's the
I
pitch?
can explain a little bit of what I noticed about in dealing with the Green Party and environmentalists. Back in the 80s, you had this strong anti-nuclear weapon movement and peace movement. And when the Soviet Union fell and the Cold War ended, all those people went somewhere else because they didn't have a big bad Russia or big bad America to really worry about nuclear war anymore. So they all went and hijacked the environmentalist movement, which had previously at that time had been very pro-nuclear. So they had this inrush of all the peaceniks, and the peaceniks hated nuclear weapons, and they hated nuclear power. That's been one of the big problems.
And one of the things is nuclear is scary. Let me give you an example of how this scariness goes around. There is a technique used in science called nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy. It's actually really important.
That sounds scary.
And I could go through the whole details of it. It's pretty involved, but it does not actually.
That's a lot of syllables. That's a lot of syllables.
Well, it's what your MRI is.
Yes, exactly. But they call it magnetic resonance imaging because if they put nuclear in there, people would be scared because and it's the thing is, you have to be able to deal with the risk and just have people explain this. And I think you have to show these things and have people like go out there and like the people from these nuclear towns and say, hey, we live here. We don't have 3 heads. Okay. Our fish do not are not mutating. Okay. I eat the fish out of this river. There's actually places where since they warm up the water, sometimes nuclear plants, they actually will have fish hatcheries using the warmer water. So you have to basically get past that. And I've talked with people and explained it, and it's just a matter of pushing past a lot of misconceptions. And a lot of these misconceptions are stoked because people assume that it's actually as bad as The Simpsons. But,
yeah, or they've watched that movie, The China Syndrome, or that the recent one about Chernobyl, which was actually really, really good. That was very well done, but it's frightening. I mean, that's the opposite end of what can happen.
It's
so it can be an environmental disaster, but if you've got proper safety things in place, like we do, like here in the United States, we do have, your chances of an accident are way low. Even 3 Mile Island was not really. I don't think any nuclear material was released from that, if I recall. I may be wrong.
No one died there.
No one died, and I don't think that there was anything released into the environment.
And as bad as Fukushima is, what happened at Fukushima? One of the largest earthquakes in the history of the world caused a giant tidal wave to hit a nuclear power plant, and it caused a minor radiation leak
Yeah.
that they cleaned up really quick.
Yeah, the biggest thing there was we basically realized that nuclear plants have a bit of a vulnerability to losing offsite power, and that's why they've now actually implemented at all the plants in the United States. They now have like a little building that's on the highest place of the site where they have generators, and they now have groups they have a generator unit that can be flown around the country if a plant is cut out from offsite power, because that's one of the things a lot of people don't realize, is that nuclear power has one of the most amazing safety cultures of any industry.
It does.
I mean, I wish oil refining had that kind of safety culture. I mean, if you see how many oil refineries explode and catch fire, I mean, you'd think people would be wanting to be afraid. I'm worried about those kind of facilities. Okay, yeah. not nuclear plants.
Yeah, Omega, to speak to your father, that we had, I think at the Defense Nuclear Facilities Safety Board, we had some representatives from the Navy nuclear program, the people who are in charge of swapping out nuclear power plants and ships, come and talk to us about their safety culture, because they have a 100% safety record. Like, nothing has ever gone wrong, because they are just so darn good with their safety protocols and so forth. In the what has like 60 plus years that the Navy has been dealing with nuclear power, they have never had any problems with it.
Yeah, I may have mentioned him earlier. Jerry Purnell was a science fiction writer and a big proponent of nuclear power, and he always said, if we were really that worried about nuclear power, just get the U.S. Navy to run it all.
Yeah, exactly, because they have their stuff wired together.
Well, one thing I'll mention is look up NERWIN, NR1. We don't know. Obviously the reactor is classified, but you can see how big the ship it was in. That was not a very big sub. That was pretty small. It was a research sub that was never actually commissioned as a Navy ship, but was used for like deep submergence research. And it had really long endurance because it had a nuclear reactor board. But yes, they were able to put in a nuclear. This is this is a long time ago, well before I was even an idea. So
I'm curious, when it comes, I don't know if you know this off the top of your head, the nuclear reactor. Oh wow, that is small.
And it has a functioning nuclear reactor inside.
Portable.
Yeah,
that'll fit in the RV.
One of my dreams is to someday it would be to get convinced like Elon Musk to put a nuclear reactor in a yacht. And
that's what I was thinking, because if you need to get around the regulations, just go 25 miles off the coast, hit international waters, build, and then just put your lines out. Because that's what my follow-up question is going to be: is how much output is on a super carrier? And I mean, could you park something 25 miles off the coast, and if hurricane are coming, you just move the boats and then move them back when hurricane's gone? I know that's overly simplistic and caveman, but like, why is that a dumb idea?
It's not. I mean,
cool.
you could. I'm actually thinking like use the technology we use for semi-submersible oil rigs, and you could actually have
the pieces are there. Like,
yeah, I mean, you could plant this thing off of the coast and pipe in power and water, and just have like a buoy that would act as the link there.
Right. And
so the Gerald R. Ford makes 25% greater than the 550 megawatts of a Nimitz.
There you have it.
I don't know what that means.
How many megawatts did you say?
500. The Nimitz does 550. The Ford does 25% greater.
Yeah, that's definitely equivalent to a medium-sized power plant.
Okay, yes, I was trying to scale something in my head because I'm like, I feel like a lot of coastal remote towns could benefit off that big time too,
Mhm.
or at least like it could include, it could help with redundancy. If you're ever in a pinch, like when Houston was going through the freeze, you know,
Yeah.
the,
Well,
the
there was actually an Army nuclear reactor operator program, which was going to power it was going to power remote radar sites. So there's actually an Army nuclear reactor operator badge.
huh?
And that's also the program where the U.S. had the only fatal nuclear accident in U.S. history.
Was it a fall?
No, it was actually severe. It was SL1. It basically we had a reactor go very out of control, and it ended up with a guy being impaled to the ceiling with a control rod.
Oh, wow, that sounds gruesome.
Yeah, it's SL1 is serious business. We learned a lot from that, and we changed a lot of things just to avoid having something like SL1 happen again. There's a lot that goes into it, but it's and that happened in the 50s. So now, if there's one thing I wanted to share about nuclear power is before we I don't know, I think we're running out of time here, but
Oh, you got 20 minutes.
Okay.
Oh.
Well, one thing I wanted to mention is about just the level of security at these nuclear power plants. If there's ever a zombie apocalypse, go for the nuclear power plant. The security there is ridiculous. And this, I mentioned a bit before about how I tried to apply to be an operator. And the reason I didn't get in there is because I didn't anticipate just how long I was going to be needing to get into the interview. And I ended up being late, which probably was why I did not actually get the job. I ended up being late to the interview. I mean, I was really interested in it, and alternate universe, I might have been working at a nuclear power plant, but okay, we'll start at the gate. You go through a gate, and there's a guard there who is armed. Also, one of the jobs that I actually recommended to Boss Mongo when he was getting out of the service was working in the nuclear power security, like Wackenhut or something like that, or one of the big contractors there, because they hire people straight out of the pointy tip of the spear when they get out, because they want the best in terms of security.
Yeah. For Paul, and Dan, you might not have been around. Boss Mongo was a light colonel in Special Forces.
Yeah, I know who he was.
Yeah. I'm very glad you did an interview with him.
We did it too.
That was one of the ones I watched.
Yeah, it was. I never got to meet him, but I did some money meetups with him, and I had those interviews. So, hat tip to Boss Mongo. Anyway, going into the plant, you go up. After you get in the parking lot, you're still not actually inside the plant. There might be some administrative building. Once you get into the perimeter, that perimeter is guarded very heavily. You go to the first, what they call man trap. Basically, it's an area where you have to go through and be screened, and there's no one there. You have to actually call ahead, and no one was actually answering when I tried to get in there. But then you go through that layer of security. Meanwhile, there's a fence, and there are people in these towers with sniper rifles.
Wow.
And then when I went into the main area, there was you had to go through a metal detector and a bomb sniffer that puff in there, and there was a guy sitting there in body armor with an M4 slung across his chest. I mean, he wasn't and he looked. I mean, he wasn't being posturing or anything, but it was, they're all, the people in the back were all carrying, it was like, yeah, no one's going to try anything here. And I actually know one of my friends, actually, his uncle is one of the guys who designed the security camera system for these places. It basically, if you think of all the movie tropes of trying to get into a facility, they already have it around there. Like, even if the guy looks away, if he trips a sensor, it will record the period of the trip, so he can actually just look back there and see the person there. And they have like layers and layers of security. So yeah, if you're short of sending the entire U.S. military to one of these plants or something, they're basically like a little fortress.
So it's a good question, because my understanding of most safety regulations are written in blood. What has prompted that level of redundancy as far as like examples go? Is there a example of nuclear power plant espionage that you're aware of, or what was the biggest use of force on a nuclear facility that they felt snipers, like all of this was necessary? Because in the past it wasn't. Does anything come to mind?
Well, they realized that the nuclear industry realized that if something goes, you actually have a break-in on one of these plants, you're probably going to get you could end up with something like a ban or nothing ever being built again. And this also comes from a military background, so they take this stuff extremely seriously. And spent nuclear fuel is very radioactive. And if you had someone who could actually steal spent nuclear fuel and didn't care if they died in the process, they could conceivably use it in like a dirty bomb.
Yeah.
They would certainly die a horrible death in the process. They would,
Right.
I remember my dad mentioning that if he were to drive at highway speed over a spent nuclear rod in his car, that would be enough to give him a lethal dose.
Wow.
Those things are, when they come straight out of the reactor, they are physically hot and also extremely radioactive.
Yeah.
So stealing one of those, yeah, it'd probably kill anyone who did it. But if you had enough people who were insane, someone could potentially try and steal them. And no one wants this. It's one of those things where they don't want to take the chance.
Yeah.
Sure.
I'm just kind of surprised that you don't see more heavy security at places like natural gas terminals or
well, they have to, there's so many of them. And I sort of tend to agree, because I think there's a lot more, or there's a lot of room for sabotage there. But again, I feel the oil industry tends to write its safety standard off of built precedent. It takes a rig exploding before we put down a new layer of rules. To me, the nuclear safety seems to be very preventative, or presumptuous, I should say. And I don't mean that like in a condescending way, but presumptuous as because I'm trying to think of, has this ever happened where an armed force was like, all right, let's get something out of this, or that's where I was just sort of trying to wrap my head around at what point in time did they feel like this level of defense was necessary. And what kind of comes to mind is when you say that most of your nuclear professionals are former military, it almost seems a regulation out of habit than out of necessity.
Partly, yeah. I would.
Well, that's where they get trained. I mean, it's as far as I don't know, at the Defense Nuclear Facilities place where I worked at, we had, besides the board members, we had a staff of about 90 people or so. 85 of them, more or less, were engineers of one stripe or another, or scientists. And I'd say 90% of them were ex-military, and a large percentage of those were Naval Academy graduates, and probably also an equally large number were graduates of the Naval Nuclear program, which is a very difficult program to get through. My hat's off to Omega's dad for going through that. So it's just, the whole business has a military mindset because that's where the people come from.
Right.
Oh yeah, and a lot of the original nuclear power plants in the United States were built to make nuclear weapons. So
Yeah.
you had that from the very
Exactly. So, like if you've seen the movie Oppenheimer, it's got a lot of faults, but it does show that, the level of security at the Los Alamos site, and because it was a military site. And I think that culture, the military culture, just came through in the rest, the succeeding decades, even for civilian nuclear purposes. They still had that military mindset because most of the people involved were ex-military.
I will
Yeah,
say,
the only-
Argonne National Laboratory and other national labs, they have a not quite the same as a nuclear plant but they do have a very strict security program. So, and I think,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the only place I can think of that fits this situation has been the nuclear plant in Ukraine. And during the initial invasion, the Russians and the Ukrainian nuclear guards negotiated the passage of control because neither side wanted to fight for it.
Yeah.
In that particular way.
I could only imagine the safety officer sign while like this facility was absolutely getting shelled. It's just like, oh my God, this thing's only rated for like 40 millimeter shells, not 45.
Well, no. My understanding that those bunkers were Soviet made, and they make they were designed to withstand nuclear weapons.
Yeah. The thing, people often get the idea about the difference between the two different main kinds of Russian reactor. The VVER and its different versions is kind of similar to what we would call a pressurized water reactor. And but the thing that happened in Chernobyl, that was an RBMK, and it's a completely different design.
Yeah. I when it comes to the fighting on the front of Ukraine with the nuclear reactor, I can only imagine that the person running it was somewhat similar to you, Omega, like somebody's kid or grandson, and his grandfather ran the plant before him, like thinking there might be a day, there might be a war there, and then he just comes home like during Thanksgiving or their Christmas, and like, yeah, it was pretty bad. Like just what you were preparing for, it went through that. It just that has to be because from what you're telling me, this is also my experience with a few nuclear professionals I met. There seems to be a lineage thing. Like there's people who do nuclears and have kids who are interested or at least do it, and so on and so on. It's an interesting lineage thing that begins to start. A thing I want to pivot with sort of the final time that we had. If you got, what insights could you provide to somebody who's, let's say, my age, who maybe wants to pivot into nuclear through the civilian route? Like you're probably a little too old for the military. If you were interested in nuclear power, that route, the civilian route, what civilian routes would you guys recommend for somebody who wants to get like be in a relevant position working in a nuclear plant? What would be the route somebody might take that isn't military?
There's various community college programs that can train you on nuclear reactor operations. I know I have a friend who lives near the Dresden plant, and there's they have a nearby junior college which actually offers training that would help get you started toward being reactor operator. Also, like training to be like and doing rad protection. There's a huge demand for that in hospitals, but also in nuclear power plants and such.
Right. Yeah, no, most people I know who do want to be somewhat involved in nuclear do it for the medical reasons, but not the actual plant reasons, because we don't really have too many down here in Texas. We have a few, but not many. But I was curious, Dan, what do you think?
Gosh, I don't really know. Well, I'm thinking, I mentioned earlier the trade area, being a welder, a plumber, whatever.
Definitely.
Really good. Pardon?
I was just agreeing with you, definitely.
Oh, yeah. So if you want to go that route, be really, really good at your job and don't get arrested for stupid stuff. So you can pass the background check.
Keep
I
it
do
cool.
have a final question to ask on a little bit of lighter note. And this might be just for Omega, but Dan might get it. I'm pretty sure Paul won't. So, what do you think? Do you think it's a danger if we take all our nuclear waste and put it on the moon? Do you think there's a very high chance that an alien signal could hit that nuclear power waste and knock the moon out of orbit, or is that something we should just not think about?
I wouldn't bother thinking about that. I think that a great way to get rid of nuclear waste is to shoot it into the sun.
Or to Venus.
Or to Venus, yeah.
Yeah.
But, one of those places.
The biggest problem, what I'd be most scared about, loading all that nuclear fuel into a rocket.
Yeah.
You're basically, if you do that wrong, you have just created a heck of a dirty bomb.
There'll be a cloud of stuff all around the Earth.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. For those who don't know, I was doing the plot of the pilot of Space 1999.
Oh,
I
see.
I
never
I recognized it, and the best thing about that show is I thought the design of their like flyer eagle things looked pretty cool. Kind of has like it looked like if NASA wanted to like NASA in like the 60s or 70s wanted to like really go gonzo and like fight the aliens, that's what that thing would look like.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, my only concern with the moon is that the aliens might get the impression that we're not very tidy. They come up to Earth and they see the moon, like, this is the most ghetto place we ever been to.
If you're going to go to the moon, you might as well go to the sun.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can see that.
Though I think the amount of stuff you could do with nuclear power in space. I mean,
definitely.
They don't have to carry around the shielding because you're not any. You just move yourself far enough away.
Yeah. Orion drives, a great idea, but that'll have to be in a future panel episode.
Orion drives are really good if you have to get into space right away in a big hurry. But
why haven't No, I could think of a reason why, but I feel that is sort of an undeveloped. Maybe it's just not high on the priority list. Why hasn't there been, or why do y'all feel there hasn't really been a movement to space propulsion with nuclear energy? I mean,
well, there is. All the satellites and space probes and stuff are nuclear powered.
Yeah.
Oh, I learned that.
You can build a thing called a radioisotope thermal generator, which will generate power from the decay heat of radioactive materials. And here's the fun part. You can build one that's not quite as efficient as the ones they make with plutonium out of literal nuclear waste.
Yeah.
They actually have a bunch of them that they built in the Soviet Union, that were fueled with like strontium-90, which is something you can get out of nuclear waste.
Yeah.
Nuclear waste is, it's actually not really waste, except for a very, very, very tiny fraction. You can always do stuff with the nuclear waste.
Nuclear waste, more like nuclear potential.
Indeed.
Exactly.
It's the only type of recycling that environmentalists don't like. They don't want to, after Jimmy Carter decided that, not the person on Ricochet, but the president, decided that we should recycle our nuclear fuel. Well, we basically, unlike, they have reprocessing in France, they have reprocessing in the UK and other places.
I mean, we ship ours to them too.
Yeah,
If
let
you want to buy our
places.
nuclear waste, we're happy to sell it to them.
I mean, we should be recycling this stuff. We could make, there's a lot of things you can make from spent nuclear fuel, and the more radioactivity you pull out for other purposes, the less there is that it's actually waste. There'll still be some waste. Not everything can be used, but you'll pull more and more of it out. It's, as I said, they say reprocessing, but they really should be saying it's nuclear recycling.
Yep. And I mean, every year, every decade, we learn another technique that makes more and more of it recyclable.
We're actually, one thing that I'm thinking is going to become more interesting is, have you ever heard of beta voltaics?
I can't even pronounce that.
Oh.
It's like photovoltaic cells, only it's beta voltaic. And they've been actually using these little nuclear batteries, and they generate very low amounts of power, but they last a really long time.
Right.
They've been using ones that use tritium, which you can make pretty easily in a nuclear reactor. It's actually an unwanted byproduct most of the time.
Were a lot of watches used to be powered by that?
You can put tritium inside a little glass tube with some phosphor and make a thing called a tracer. And it will glow, and that's where you end up with like tritium gun sights, tritium things in watches.
Yeah.
I used to have like a keychain with tritium, but sadly it went past its half-life and it decayed out.
Yeah.
But
interesting.
You can, and these beta voltaics are great because they generate like a really low power generation for a long period of time. So yeah, there's lots of things you can do with nuclear waste and nuclear material. It's not just and the one thing you can't do is make a barrel of glowing green goo.
Because it's actually blue.
And if you get that glowing blue, then it's pretty intense, radioactive.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that's a great place to kind of leave it here for today. We've been talking for 90 minutes. It's great having you both on. Maybe we can do another follow-up panel on this or some other subject.
Okay.
That'd be really cool.
I would like to get Stad on here because Stad is great on nuclear, and he actually worked in the industry and was a Navy nuke. So
yeah. I was trying to see if I could get my friend Mark McDonough on. He was also a submarine commander and nuclear engineer for a while. So
nice. I mean, better. I salute the people who actually do this rather than just being a fanboy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always interesting. Both of y'all were outstanding. Thank you all so much.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we'll see you guys later in the comments on Ricochet and on this channel. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.